Blade runners have followed me my whole life. Everywhere. In bars, in cars, sidewalks, stores, everywhere. There's no escape. I'm the one they can't retire. I'm the one who will stand up. What does it mean to be human? At what point do man's creations become equal to man? And if that's possible, then can men be gods, or are men still just men? Do our creations become more human than us? Both Blade Runner movies seek to answer, or at least explore these questions, but they go about it in almost opposite ways. Today, we're taking a look at both Blade Runner movies and what they have to tell us about what it means to be both a real human being and a real hero.
He say you Blade Runner.
Tell him I'm eating.
Ridley Scott's Blade Runner released in 1982, but the final cut didn't release until 2007. Including the theatrical and final cuts of the film, there are 7 cuts of the movie. Here is the list of them. Work print version, San Diego sneak preview cut, US theatrical release, international theatrical release, US broadcast version, director's cut, and the final cut. Most movies get 1 cut. 2 cuts if the studios want to release an unrated version or a director's cut. But 7, man, that even beats out Apocalypse Now. Of course, some of these cuts were due to studio interference and stupid demands, like wanting the film to have a happy ending or forcing in terrible voiceover narration from Harrison Ford.
Skin jobs. That's what Bryant called replicants. In history books, he's the kind of cop used to call black men.
But with the director's cut and final cut, Scott played around with the characterization of Deckard and the idea that he might or might not be a replicant. For the purposes of this video, I'm only talking about the final cut, which I see as the best cut and as the definitive version of the film. The film opens with a text crawl introducing us to the Blade Runner profession. Replicants, banned on Earth but used as slave labor in space, are seen merely as pieces of technology. Should they escape or come to Earth, a special type of cop, a Blade Runner, hunts them down and kills them. Except they don't call it killing, but retiring. The language dehumanizes the replicants, as people don't see them as human. It's not murder, it's just sort of like turning off a computer, or taking a car to a junkyard. Morals and ethics play no part in it, it's merely mundane. But then the film contradicts itself in the opening scene. A man gives a voight-kampff test to a replicant. For anyone who hasn't seen Blade Runner, if you haven't seen it yet, what are you doing? A voight-kampff test is a test that people give to determine if someone is a human or a replicant. The questioner asks emotionally provocative questions and studies the subject's behavior, especially their eyes. We'll get back to the whole eyes thing a little later. During this examination, we see Leon act like a human. He shows a range of emotions, and when he discovers that he's been found to be a replicant, he fights for his life. Really, the story of Blade Runner is about these replicants, doomed to die early deaths, fighting for their lives and for their freedom. So it's interesting that the protagonist of Blade Runner, Deckard, is a man tasked with killing the replicants. It's like, what if we watched a period piece about pre-Civil War America, and it's about a slave catcher hunting down and killing runaway slaves? That's pretty much the plot of the movie, but it's set in a version of LA that's dingy and filled with homeless people, drugs, degeneracy, buildings in ruin, and has a vast gulf between the haves and the have-nots. So basically, it's exactly like LA today. Except for the part about it always raining. Total immersion breaker. But you gotta admit, it does look cool. The film parallels the story of Deckard with the stories of the escaped replicants. The replicants, led by Roy Batty, desperately search for a way to extend their lives, as the Tyrell Corporation limits their lifespans to 4 years. Why? Because after 4 years, they begin to exhibit human traits, such as emotions. At the same time, Deckard uses his wits to track them down and kill them all. But he begins to question whether or not he's the good guy when he meets Rachel, an experimental replicant model. You see, a Blade Runner can detect that someone is a replicant after 20 to 30 questions, but it took Deckard 100 questions to guess that she was not human, and even then, he still had some doubts. For perhaps the first time, Deckard sees the humanity in replicants, and of course, he sees it through her eyes. Eyes play a major role in Blade Runner. One of the first shots is an extreme close-up of an eye. We see reflections of fire in it. What do these eyes have to do with anything? As they say, eyes are the windows into our souls. Blade Runners look into the eyes of replicants to see if they're human. They examine the eyes to find out if their subject has a soul. When Batty confronts Tyrell, he crushes his eyes, killing the soul of the man playing God who gifted him a soulless body. But what makes Rachel closer to being human? Memories. Tyrell implanted his niece's memories into Rachel so that she believes that she has lived a full life, even if she's only a couple years old at most. To almost anyone, she is indistinguishable from a human. But these memories aren't hers. Does it matter though? Can she have a soul, a self, if it's all based on a lie, a reproduction? Does she have what's basically a simulated soul? But is a simulated soul still just that, a soul? The lines between human and replicant further blur with Deckard's dream of a unicorn. It's something he could have never seen in his actual life. At the end, when he discovers that Gaff left an origami of a unicorn at his apartment, is it because Gaff knows that this memory is an implant, or is it merely a coincidence? The question that everyone likes to debate is whether or not Deckard is a replicant, but I think this question misses the point of the movie. The point isn't whether he is 100% a replicant or not, but the fact that he has to question it allows him to understand that replicants aren't merely machines, but persons. For his whole professional life, he's been assassinating living, breathing beings not unlike himself. It's fitting that Deckard's character is the least emotional and most robot-like person in the movie. We see the replicants express a whole range of emotions: love, grief, anger, disappointment, fear, and happiness. Deckard, however, remains stoic. The replicants live freely while Deckard works as a cog in a machine. In the third act, Roy plays a game of cat and mouse with Deckard. He wants Deckard to run for his life as Batty stalks him through the buildings. By reversing their roles, he allows Deckard to experience what it's like to live as a replicant, to live in constant fear. To know that at all times there is someone hunting you down, someone who wants to murder you. Then we start to see where Batty and Deckard align. Both of them fight against death. They fight for self-preservation, but not in an animalistic way. It's more of an existential battle against the inevitability of one's own demise. This anxiety towards death unites them. In very human form, Batty accepts his death. The stigmata in his hands reveal him as a kind of Christ figure, sure, but he's even more of a Christ figure for making his last act that of saving Deckard. It's an act of forgiveness against his most bitter of foes. With that act of forgiveness, he sows the seeds for a new paradigm, a paradigm that sees his kind as human. In his famous Tears in the Rain monologue, Batty harks back to the eyes motif. With his eyes, he has seen things Deckard couldn't believe. Memories that Deckard could never have. What right does the Blade Runner have to call him inhuman? In the final cut, the last lines are that of Gaff's when he's talking about Rachel.
It's too bad she won't live. But then again, who does?
The final line's ambiguity can be interpreted as a threat or as a fact of life. Gaff spared her, but other Blade Runners will surely try to kill her. Maybe he's noting that she doesn't have much time to live, considering replicants have 4-year lifespans. But I think this line digs a little bit deeper. He's acknowledging that everyone, human or replicant, dies. We all have to face our own mortality. It's the factor that binds us all together. What's it like to hold the hand of someone you love?
Interlinked.
Do they teach you how to feel finger to finger?
Interlinked.
Do you long for having your heart interlinked?
Interlinked.
Have they left a place for you where you can dream?
Interlinked.
What's it like to hold your child in your arms?
Interlinked.
What's it like to play with your dog?
Interlinked.
Do you feel that there's a part of you that's missing?
Interlinked.
Do you like to connect to things?
Interlinked.
Okay, let's move on to Blade Runner 2049, the sequel that released in 2017, 35 years after the original film, and 2 years before the year that the original Blade Runner was set. The sequel follows Kay, a replicant Blade Runner played by the king of literally me characters, Ryan Gosling. In 2049, Villeneuve explores what it means to be human from the opposite perspective of the original. If, in the original Blade Runner, we witness Deckard questioning whether or not he was a replicant, then in 2049, we follow Kay as he questions whether or not he's actually a human. The baseline test that Kay takes on a regular basis is the one thing keeping him alive and employed. In the world of 2049, replicants aren't outright banned on Earth, but they must be monitored. The baseline test determines if the replicant thinks and acts like a machine, or if he starts to exhibit human traits. Once they gain somewhat of a soul, that's when they become illegal. Kay is interlinked. He has no illusions about himself. He knows that he's a machine made to kill rogue replicants. But that all changes when he finds out about a miracle, a child born from a replicant woman. The police force wants to memory hold the existence of the child, and so they order Kay to kill the child and destroy any and all evidence of his or her existence. The government fears that news of this birth might inspire replicants to rebel against the status quo. Wallace, the new Tyrell, has a vested interest in this child too. Replicants who can give birth would expand his corporate empire exponentially. Kay holds the balance of society on his shoulders. What Kay doesn't expect is to discover that the child, or one of the children, as it initially seems that twins were born, might be him. His memories and the investigation collide. He knows exactly where to find the horse, and he knows what is inscribed in the horse before he actually finds it. He uses his memory to help him find the child, but maybe the investigation is really into himself. Maybe he isn't who he thinks he is. Maybe he has been at least sort of human this whole time. Maybe he does, in fact, have a soul. His holographic girlfriend, Joy, encourages him to embrace his humanity. She even gives him a new name, a name fit for a human, Joe. Remember this. When he visits Dr. Anna Stelline, the woman who makes the best memories for the replicants, he discovers that the memory is real and not a fabrication. It's illegal to put real memories into replicants, so it must be his, right? Let's take a look at the visual foreshadowing in this scene. When we look at Kay through the glass, the reflection of Anna rests on top of his body, showing us that there is some of her in him. When we see Anna from Kay's side of the glass, his darkened reflection sits behind her. He is, or his self is, a reflection of her. He is her shadow. The revelation that the memory is real triggers a visceral reaction in Kay. He reacts to it with anger. We haven't seen him show much, if any, emotion until now, but this reaction kickstarts his emotional journey to developing a soul. There are key emotions and experiences he has that grow him into a human. After this episode of anger, Joy introduces him to the feeling of intimacy. She hires a replicant prostitute and syncs with her so that they can give each other physical love. Up until this point, she was just a hologram, someone he could see but never touch. They could never consummate their relationship. It was tricks of light and conversation. Kay was basically Joaquin Phoenix and her, but with this night of physical intimacy, Kay discovers what it means to give himself up to someone else. His love for Joy deepens, and that capacity to love and be loved is one of the most human characteristics there is. He ascends from virgin to Chad, from incel to fake cell. The next major emotion Kay feels is grief. After finding Deckard, love catches up to him and destroys the device that contains Joy, destroying that version of Joy forever. Losing a loved one, grieving someone close to you, is something that happens to just about everyone. It's a feeling that puts the whole world and our place in it into perspective. This grief allows him to open himself up to his true life's purpose. But before that, he faces disillusionment. The sad truth is that those memories that helped his investigation weren't his. They were real memories, but they were from someone else. They were from Dr. Anna Stelline. She was the child of Rachel and Deckard, the first person born from a replicant. Kay is a nobody. He is not the chosen one, but he has the freedom to choose to make a difference. His disillusionment grows when he encounters the giant version of Joy. This is the ultimate doomer vaporwave aesthetic scene. I think the most important part of this scene is when she calls him Joe.
You look like a good Joe.
Remember how earlier she told him that he's human, and because he's human, he should call himself Joe?
A real boy needs a real name. Joe.
He realizes that she was only telling him what he wanted to hear. She was programmed to essentially be a yes woman to him and make him feel loved, but not necessarily ground him in reality. In essence, their entire relationship was a result of programming. She wasn't his girlfriend. She was a product. Sort of, or just like him. Earlier in the film, Joshi reminds him that he doesn't have a soul and he's gotten along fine without it. For his whole life, not only was he reminded about his state of soullessness, but it was imperative for him to have it remain that way. But now, he found it. Maybe it was always there. Kay emerges out of this dark night of the soul with a purpose, and as we're told in the film, the most human thing one can do is die for a cause. He becomes a reflection of Roy Batty from the first Blade Runner, as he becomes human and gives his life for freedom and, while in the process, saves Deckard's life. By rescuing Deckard and uniting him with his daughter Anna, Kay proves himself human. He might die at the end, he might not, but if he does die, he at least dies as a person and not as a machine. Lying on the stairs, he embraces his freedom. His final sacrificial act provides a light to the world. Because of him, a future of equality between replicants and humans becomes a possibility. In this moment, he's more human than human. seen things you people wouldn't believe. Goatsy, one man, one jar, Pain Olympics. All those memories be lost in time, like tears and rain. Time to die.